Hello, everybody. We are on tonight with Brian McLaughlin with Mountain Man Medical. Brian, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Brian McLaughlin. As you already said, I am the Director of Medical Training over at Mountain Man Medical. And I got my start on emergency medicine as a Boy Scout. I ran around with my dad. He was a firefighter. Went on a bunch of calls with him. He got me started in bleeding control. And then I went on to Boy Scouts and then joined the military as a U.S. Navy corpsman. I deployed with the Marine Corps out to Afghanistan, saw a lot of combat, very kinetic kind of environment that I was in. And I really enjoyed it. Spent a lot of time in the ER running on a rig and as an ER tech. And then after I got out of the military, for a short time, I consulted with companies about active shooter medicine and preparation for natural and man-made catastrophes. And so now I am the director of Mountain Man Medical, and I do all of the talking. I'm the subject matter expert. Mountain Man Medical is based totally on my expertise and experience. So I designed all the trauma kits, and now I do all the talking.
And you do it well.
Thank you.
Do it well. So you were just telling me before we went on that Mountain Man Medical is owned by concealedcarry.com.
That's right. It's one of the brands. Jacob Paulson, he owns concealedcarry.com. I was a writer over there for a little while, and there's just so many articles about the new Glock 19 I can write before my eyes start to bleed. So I was getting kind of bored with it, and so I decided to move on to something else. And right about that time, Jacob asked me if I wanted to help start Mountain Man Medical. And I said, well, that sounds like a fun. Yeah, let's do that. So went through it, built up Mountain Man Medical. And we're doing pretty good.
Awesome. So you said you got your start in the Boy Scouts. Your dad was a firefighter. Was he a firefighter paramedic or
firefighter EMT? Yeah, he was a firefighter for about 30 years out at Rocky Mountain Arsenal and a couple other departments. And he loved it. It was his favorite thing in the world, being a firefighter. And sometimes he would come home and the tip of his nose would be singed and his eyebrows is smelling like smoke, and he just loved being a firefighter. And I always kind of got that kind of a tick from him, but I never really wanted to get into firefighting. It didn't seem like a whole lot of fun crawling around on the bottom of a smoky building, sweating my butt off. So I decided to go do it in Afghanistan instead.
Yeah, I was, as we discussed, I was in EMS and a lead paramedic for 14 years and never got on the firefighter side of the house. It was strictly all county 911 EMS systems.
Gotcha. Yep.
So you did that as a Boy Scout, and then when did you go into the Navy and become a corpsman?
So I joined up in 2007. So and then deployed 2010, and I've been out since 2013. Gotcha.
So your entire time, you went to hospital corpsman school, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Where were you stationed at?
So I was stationed out in. I went to Great Lakes for boot camp. Went out to North Carolina to Jacksonville, Camp Lejeune for Corps School. Camp Lejeune.
Been there, and I've been to Camp Lejeune Naval Hospital more than once.
Okay. Oh, you know the areas then.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I've been some horrible places in my life. Camp Lejeune is the worst. Not necessarily Camp Lejeune, but Jacksonville, North Carolina. It was not my favorite place. I can say that.
Yeah. And you know what? I really don't. I don't care if it's, well, when I was in the Marine Corps at Pendleton, we called it ocean slime, but Oceanside. I've done a lot of shooting competitions at Fort Bragg, Columbus, Georgia, and I live here in Georgia. All these places, the towns that are around military bases, I think, at least in my time. Now, I was in long before you were, so. And I don't know if they've gotten any better.
Not in my experience. I don't know. I've been out for a little bit myself, so maybe we can have somebody weigh in at some point saying like, "Oh no, it's still the same."
Right. So you went in 2007?
Yep, 2007. Yep.
How long was hospital corpsman school? I guess it's called your school or whatever.
I forget the length of time. I think the total time for the school is 3 months, but I was held in reserve there for a little while until I classed up for about 3 months, and I spent the time there working in the neurology department, helping to study TBI patients, traumatic brain injuries. I've got my name on a couple of studies that were done there, helping out and trying to do some research on traumatic brain injuries. So I did that for a little while before I classed up, and then went to core school.
Okay. So you were doing that as what was your rank? Seaman of.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I at that point I would be hospital. I was probably a hospital apprentice E2, and then and then I left the military as an E5 hospital second class petty
Second
officer.
class petty officer, right? Yeah. Okay. So you go in, you're there. How long did you spend at Camp Lejeune? Did you stay in the hospital the whole time? Because I know, because I'll tell you, when I left the Marine Corps, I stepped out of Camp Lejeune and I went straight to work the next day as a paramedic for Onslow County.
Hmm.
So I transported to both hospitals, but Camp Lejeune Naval Hospital had their own ambulances that serviced the base.
Hmm.
Was that the case still?
I don't know. I was up in the neurology department, so I didn't get to
Okay.
the ER until I got out to 29 Palms. So I was.
You went to the stumps?
That's it. Yeah, I went from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. Me and my wife packed everything I owned into the back of my truck, and we drove cross country in 2 days just to make it to my next duty station. And yeah, we were at 29 Palms for 2 years there, and that's where I really got a good education on trauma medicine. The ER doctors there, especially the ones that are in the military, really love taking the corpsmen under their wings. You know, pretty often they say, "Hey, Mac, come over here. You're gonna need to know this at some point. You know, you got to learn how to do this thing." And you'd get to see everything, gunshots and stabbings and, the shrapnel and pretty much everything that I got to see out in combat. I had at least a little bit of experience with in the ER. So that's where I kind of got my feel for handling blood and bad situations. And then I got a chance to ask all of the questions that I had in my head about medicine to the doctors. Anytime that there was some downtime, I would start picking the doctor's brains, about different trauma things, proper way to think medically. And they would kind of work me through some different exercises to kind of help me in my growth. So I really love that aspect of it.
Oh, awesome. So you were saying that you spent, core school is how long? 3 months, you say?
Man, I can't even remember. I would say, yeah, core school was 3 months. That was up in Great Lakes. And then Field Medical Training Battalion, that's the one that was out in Camp Lejeune. And that was another 3 months. But altogether, start to finish, I was in training for a year before I actually got to my first training command, or my first command.
Yeah. Was that Lejeune when you were up in the neurological?
No, first command would have been 29 Palms.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yep. And I went straight to the ER because my hope was to get to the Marine Corps at some point. And I figured the ER is going to get me the most practice with trauma medicine. So at some point I'm going to need to know that. And that turned out to be true.
One of the things I always wondered about when I was in the Marine Corps is what it took to be and I don't know if this terms are still used, but in the Marine Corps, we called them green side corpsmen and blue side corpsmen. Green side corpsmen, we had a lot of respect for. Blue side corpsmen, we didn't really care much for.
Yeah, not so much.
Yeah. But I always wondered if, most of the corpsmen I knew on green side, they were pretty motivated. I have met some that it just seemed like they got the short end of the straw, or the short straw in the draw. Is there a process? Do you volunteer to go green side, or are you selected? Are you, voluntold?
I would say yes and no. There's a mixture of both. You got those guys that don't want to be there. They had wanted a nice, cushy career on blue side, sitting on a ship somewhere, and they weren't anticipating having to be, stomping around in the woods with rucksacks. Myself
with a bunch of asshole Marines, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that above all else, right?
Mhm.
But there was definitely a lot of the guys there that was what they were there for. They wanted to be corpsmen with the Marine Corps. And then there's just a mixture of guys that just kind of got thrown in there and they didn't mean to be there, but they really like it. And now it's everything to them. And so
Right.
like when I had gotten in, that's what I had wanted, was to get with the Marine Corps. And I did not want to be on a boat at all. In fact, they tried to make me go on a cruise once, and I said no thanks. And they said, "Well, you have to go." And I said, "Well, no, I don't, because I'm about to reenlist, and if you try to make me go, I won't reenlist. So you can't make me." And so I had him over a barrel that way, and I played him pretty well. And
Yeah.
it did not make me any friends, but I didn't have to go on a cruise, and so I'm a sailor by title only. I never even set foot on a boat.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have that choice when they sent me on the Inchon during the Gulf War.
Yeah.
But so, what was your life like? Contrasting between what a blue side corpsman and a green side corpsman, and what was your life like? More than what I just said, but what was your life like being with the green side? When I was in, I knew a lot of them that, I mean, they were just as much a PT monster as we were, and got involved with everything. And most of the times, I mean, if you had a corpsman that was just that wanted to be there, I mean, he was treated like a brother in the Marine Corps. And of course, most people probably don't know this, that if you are a corpsman attached to a Marine unit, that corpsman is allowed to wear a slight variation of the Marine Corps uniform.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are great questions. It was the most defining experience of my life, obviously, going to combat and being with the Marines. And I've got a lot of respect for the Marines. They took really good care of me. I was one of those that was very dedicated, very interested to learn the combat and to shoot. And I was one of those gung-ho people. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And a contrast between the side from blue side to green side is I can't really say for sure what that looks like. Right. I think that's kind of, I was never blue side, so I can't really say for sure, but I do know that they spend a lot more time on a boat than I did. They got shot at a little bit less than I did, I would imagine. And I think I really enjoyed being a corpsman with the Marine Corps because you get to do all the fun stuff that the Marines do, but you get a little bit of insulation from the bullshit, all of the formations, be here, do this. We got to go field day, the office or something like that. I'd say, oh no, I'd really love to help you guys out, but I got to be at the clinic. I got stuff I got to do, and so it was kind of nice to do that, and of course our grooming standards are a little more relaxed and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately it was, there's this love-hate relationship between Navy docs and their Marines. When I got to the unit, I wasn't in the best shape. I was in okay shape for the Navy, but I wasn't in good shape for the Marine Corps. So for the first couple of months, I was lagging in the back for quite a while. But I worked hard and PT'd my butt off. And by the end of the deployment, I was out running my Marines on a regular basis and out hiking them on all the stuff. So it was
Marines don't hike.
No, they don't hike. They ruck, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, they hump.
They hump. That's right. Yeah, they hump. I forgot. Rucking is that's Army, isn't it?
No, that's civilians for fun.
Yeah.
Hiking is for little day trippers that go look at a waterfall or something.
Okay. Yeah.
Although I do have a buddy of mine that I was in the Marine Corps with, and he's been humping the Appalachian Trail. So
that's been a dream of mine. One of my Ranger boys just got out and he went and hiked the AT as his getting out of the military gift to himself. So pretty tough dude. And I really liked my wife had said at one point, she wanted to go when I was still in the military, she wanted to go camping. And I was like, baby, no, I really don't want, I do that for work. I'm not trying to do that on my off time.
Right. I had a question. Are you familiar with the goat lab?
Yes. Yep.
Is that still a thing?
I don't know. I haven't looked into it in a while. I went through a type of thing called combat trauma management, and they had a live tissue lab, and we used pigs. So we didn't use the goats. I think the goats that I've heard of, the goat lab that I've heard of is special forces, but you're not supposed to know about that. It's supposed to be hush hush. From what I hear, I actually ran into special forces Bubba once, and I asked him, I was like, so tell me about the goat lab. And he's like, he looks at me and he's like, you know about that? I was like, dude, everybody knows about that.
Everybody knows about that.
Yeah. He's like, nobody's supposed to know about that. Everybody has to sign a
non-disclosure,
NDA. And so you're not allowed to talk about it, but everybody knows about it. But he wouldn't talk about it. He was like, nah, I'm not talking about it. I was like, okay, cool. Whatever, man. So our live tissue class, though, was a pig class on an avocado farm, and it was a fantastic class. I can say for sure that it assisted me in taking care of my Marines in Afghanistan. We had to hike this. It was like 150, 175 pound pig all over the place on a stretcher. I had 4 other guys, and we would just hike everywhere. And our goal was to try to keep this pig alive, and they would shoot it and stab it. All the pigs are in medically induced comas, so they're not awake. Otherwise they would not put up with that. Of course,
I don't know how much detail on that we should go into on YouTube. I'm a brand new channel. I'd hate to get canceled that quick, but yeah, I do know what you're talking about. So you used a pig rather than a goat. Yeah, it was exactly the same thing from my understanding. But and how long did that last? Did you do that in your field training at the stumps?
No, that was when I got to my first command in Pendleton. So I got to my first command in Pendleton, and then I went through a combat trauma management course there as a way of gearing up to go to Afghanistan. So they sent me with a bunch of the other corpsmen to this course.
Okay. So other than a hospital setting, you never really had any type of trauma experience on humans until you deployed. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was just mostly the stuff that I had been with my dad. Occasionally I would go with him on a call. So my dad was a career firefighter, but then he was also the assistant chief of our local volunteer firefighter. So occasionally when he would be home, a call would come out and I would go with him. And so I got kind of a little taste of it that way, but
exposure anyway.
Yeah, a little bit of exposure. I got to see him do stuff. I got to see him handling emergencies, like a boss, and just being totally unflustered and totally in command of the situation. And that was always something that I really wanted for myself. So I had that to emulate from my dad.
Right. But but as the HMFIC, with the responsibility of a human life, first time was in theater. Is that
yeah.
Yep. Tell me about that first experience, because I know mine, and mine was on the street. So
yeah, I think it was one of those moments that you as a young man, you always want to go out and try it, and see how you do and what you do with it. And I think I was like I wanted combat so bad. That was my only thing. That was the only thing I wanted. I wanted to be in the action as fast as possible. And we got there, and the first couple of weeks wasn't anything. And I was so bored and so disappointed. And eventually
where did you first deploy to? What was your first area of operations? So
I was down in the Helmand province in Afghanistan. We were at this little out of the way OP. Occasionally we would have some vehicles come down the road that we would check, but for the most part, we just kind of sat there. Occasionally we can hear firefights pop off at the local city. Like I don't even remember what the city was, but we would hear the firefights popping off, and I would just sit there and look outside the wire and look at all the flashes and wonder what was going on. And then eventually we got sent to a different place because I was with a police mentorship training team. And our whole goal was to take a couple of our American cops who were also like reserve Marines and take them out to the local police department and teach the Afghani cops how to be cops. Like one of the things that we had to do was to teach them not to shake down all of the civilians that they're supposed to be protecting. So what they would do is they would pull people over and search them, see if they have any like RPGs or bomb making materials, and then take anything of value that they had. And then we would say like, hey, you can't do that. And they'd be like, what? Screw you, man. I do it. This is how I get paid. They viewed it as like their compensation. Just one of the benefits of being a cop is you get to shake everybody down and take anything of value that you find. So we're trying to win hearts and minds, trying to help get them to, to treat their population correctly so that they could be more credible. And so every single day that we would go out every day and do a push to contact, which means that we would go out and we would pick a fight. So we would push out as far as we could until we started meeting opposition. We get in a big gunfight and then we come back to base every single day. So it was very kinetic. And we saw a lot of IEDs, took a lot of indirect fire. So it was an eye-opening experience. I learned a lot about myself and the world. I learned a lot of confidence that I can do some hard things and be in some hard situations and do okay. And I think that was the most valuable aspect of it. I remember at one point, one of my Marines reaches over and he slaps my bloody leg. I'm covered head to toe in blood. And he slaps my leg and he says, "I'm glad you're with us, Doc." And that was one of the most incredible feelings that I've ever felt,
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, Doc is a term of endearment that we call our corpsmen that are with us. That's what we call them. So when you first got there, when you got in theater, were you, what were some of your first responsibilities? Was it going out? You talked about the whole term that we've heard that I'm going to tell you right now, I fucking hate the term, is winning hearts and minds. That is not war. Okay.
No.
That's a UN peacekeeping mission. That's not what Marines do. And I hated that. And I hate the fact that we were in war for 20 years. Never should have been. That you don't prosecute war that way, in my opinion. But anyway, when you first got there, what was some of your first responsibilities? Were you going out into villages and giving treatment to the villagers, the children, and those type of people before you ever got into a first engagement?
To be honest, I can't really remember the timeline exactly. I did both of those things. When we got there, we were taking over a base from the British Commandos. And the British Commandos would fight the Taliban occasionally, but they had kind of a gentleman's agreement. They would say like the Taliban would say, as long as you don't go past this point, we won't fight you. And so the British just wouldn't go past that point. Of course, the Marines.
Wait, they wouldn't go past that? Would they not have enough limes?
Yeah, not enough tea or something, I guess.
Yeah.
But the Marines heard that and they were, I'm sorry, what? There's a line that we shouldn't cross. We're going to go cross that.
You saying we can't go there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
hold my beer.
Yeah. So exactly. So we would go out, pretty often just to go fight. And we would push in as often as possible to go fight the Taliban. And the Taliban at first were pretty used to the way the Brits were doing things. They didn't realize that we were doing this turnover to the Marines. And everything changed as soon as the Marines got there. We started upgrading the base and the fortifications, and we started pushing out every single day, going and picking a fight and trying to fight as much as possible. So, but between those times, I would be at on base at the BAS, and then I would run, just the basic medical for my Marines, their little boo-boos and scrapes and not feeling so well. And then occasionally we would do little missions out into the local population. And then I would take my med bag and see the local population, kids and dealing with women was really hard because you couldn't talk to her directly. She had to talk to her husband or her brother or father, who then talked to the interpreter, who then relayed the information to me. And then I had to kind of decipher it and figure out what a diagnosis was.
Or to your interpreter, from one interpreter to another interpreter, then get to you. So you got to go through 5 people just to be able to treat a patient, to figure out, to do some type of patient assessment.
Yeah, it's like somebody's reading out of a book. You have a patient that you can't see and you can't touch, but here are all of the supposed symptoms. Symptoms. You don't even know if these are right. It's just whatever he happens to say. So that makes things really difficult and kind of challenging, but I really enjoyed that aspect of it too, because I had to figure out this problem. This is the way it is. And
you got a problem, solve it. You got a problem, solve it.
Yeah.
Well, I had a couple of questions. I didn't mean to spend this long on this, but it's really kind of interesting. I think it's probably going to be interesting to the audience. So, first thing, and I don't know if you can't say anything, don't. But what type of weapons training did you get for that? I know that as a corpsman, you don't carry a firearm. However, because that's not their first priority. The corpsman's priority is not to engage in the battle, but it is to be treating Marines who are engaged in the battle that get wounded. But what type of weapons training, if any, did the Marines actually, your unit? Because I know, if you were my corpsman and I was still in the Marine Corps, and of course I was a medic before I went in the Marine Corps, during and after. So, and I was also law enforcement and SWAT. So it was kind of a combination. I knew what it meant for, if it happened, if I'm wounded and I'm on the battlefield and you come up to me and my rifle is laying there and more shit comes down, I would want you to be able to pick that rifle up and effectively employ it against a close quarters combat situation so they don't kill both of us.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Did your unit, did they have any official or unofficial, and if you can't say because it gets somebody in trouble, I understand, but can you talk us through that?
Yeah, no, I don't have any problem talking about it. That's an easy one. Getting into the military, I already had a decent background into firearms. My dad, being a firefighter, was also really interested in combatives and taught me, the basics of shooting long distance and then also the basics of combat shooting. So I did a little bit of pistol competition before I joined. When I was 15, me and my dad would go and do International Defensive Pistol, IDPA.
IDPA, yeah,
yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I got my start with weapons handling with that kind of thing. So I knew the basics pretty good. And then in boot camp, I was the only one to shoot expert. And then pretty often I would go to the range to qualify. You don't have to qualify as a corpsman, right? Because you're not a combatant technically. So you don't really have to go and learn all the stuff that the Marines are doing. And there were a lot of corpsmen that would be just like, I don't want to learn it. I don't have to, so I don't really want to. But I was totally the opposite. Like my whole goal was to go to combat, and so I wanted to be good at everything. So I would do the training that all of my Marines would do. Occasionally, I would go to the range to qualify, and I would always bet my Marines on either side of me a case of beer that I would outshoot them. And they'd get so mad at me that no doc's going to outshoot me. I was like, hey, put a case of beer on it. We'll see. And I'd always win my beer, but we didn't do a ton of that different types of training. I know I practiced pretty often all of my reloads and my transitions, and I'm an excellent shot, but you're not supposed to technically as a corpsman.
Right. How would you draw ammo and be able to practice and go to the range and shoot with them? Would they just share?
They would just say, hey, we're going to the range. We need a corpsman who wants to be medical overwatch. And I would always,
Oh, okay.
I'd
So
always roger up.
they had a lot of meaning a certain number, usually meaning a lot number of ammo that they would have out there for the platoon or the company or whatever, and you would just be able to shoot the ammo that was out there.
Yeah, and I would just jump in with whatever team that I was with at that moment, and I was always volunteering for a bunch of different ranges, and that was great because I got the opportunity to go out and train with a lot of different people. I was with the Forward Observers for a time too, where I got to go out with them on their field ops, and I really enjoyed all that. But as a corpsman, you're not technically supposed to have you can have a weapon. According to the Geneva Convention, you're allowed to have a weapon, but it's technically only in defense of your casualties. But as we know, the best battlefield medicine is fire superiority. So if everybody's shooting, I'm shooting too. I'm trying to defend my casualties. If we kill all the bad guys, I don't have to work. And there were a couple of times where I got on a couple of big guns and fought from those too. And again,
nice.
It was technically not allowed, but something that just had to happen.
Technically not allowed, or I mean, but yet it's not in violation of any UCMJ.
I don't know about the USCMJ, but I think it would be technically a violation of the Geneva Convention because I'm technically a non-combatant. So
yeah, we never signed the Geneva Convention.
Oh, well, I was told you're not allowed to be on the gun stock. You're a non-combatant. So that's what I was told. I don't know the history behind it.
Yeah, I could be wrong on that. I could be wrong on that. We're the only ones that abide by the Geneva Convention. I think we never signed on to the Hague Convention. I think I could be wrong. It's been a while, but that's interesting. Do you recall? And if so, if you want to talk about it, if you don't, that's fine too. Do you recall your first casualty in theater and the circumstances around it?
Yeah, I would say the first 1 or 2 days that we were at our new base, we were at this place called Kajaki Dam, and it was. You couldn't get to it by ground. The only way to get there is to fly in helicopters, and we didn't have any of those nice MRAPs that are all, very armored and can handle the blast of an IED. They couldn't fly those in because they were too heavy, so we had to walk everywhere we went. So we would foot patrol anywhere we needed to go.
Didn't have Hummers.
We had some Hummers, but we weren't allowed to ride in them because they weren't armored underneath. So we had them for moving stuff around the base. But
so you're so much more protected in your LPCs, and if people don't know what that means, those are called leather personnel carriers.
Yeah, your
boots.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know I didn't understand the logic behind it, but that's what we were told, and so that's what we did.
Could it have had something to do with that? Maybe if you stepped on an IED, you didn't have enough weight to set it off. Or were there a lot of pressure-weighted IEDs, or were they a lot more remotely detonated?
Well, we carried around the electronic countermeasures, the ECMs, these big backpacks with these big antennas on it, and those were supposed to disrupt any incoming signals.
Right.
So I never knew if we had ever been hit by one of those, but I did see a lot of pressure plate IEDs. Those were primarily what I saw.
Yeah, that guy with that big antenna, he's not a target at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to every person who's ever carried a radio, and he's got a big antenna on him. Well, there's two people standing next together. One of them is the radio guy, and I guarantee you the one in front of him is the guy in charge.
Just shoot them both just to be safe.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's not a joke. That's actually what the enemy would look for.
Yeah, I think when we were there, we had these the police teams, and they were driving around these unarmored Ford Rangers. They might have a machine gun mounted in the back, but that was pretty much all that they had.
Well, that's what the Taliban had.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
not
they
a whole
did
lot
a pretty
of stuff.
damn good job.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and then they had the, when I was there about 2 days, one of those Rangers hit an IED and it blew it apart. And so they brought all of the casualties into us. And so we had a mass casualty immediately. So all of the corpsmen on the fob, and I think there was like 6 of us, maybe, we all had patients to deal with. And they were messed up pretty bad. I remember trying to get an IV started on a guy. This was a pretty big thing that really affected the way I handled medicine from then on, because it was so early in my deployment. We had this guy that I was working on that I was starting to get this IV on. And I came from the ER where, like, I was good at IVs. I could get them on anybody.
Yeah.
And like they would call me in, like if the doctor couldn't get it on like a baby or an old person, or something like that, they'd call me in to come and do it.
I had the same thing.
Yeah. So I'm like working on this guy, and it's an Afghani, and he's got the interpreter up next to his head, and I'm trying to get this IV started, and the guy keeps talking to me, and he says, the casualty keeps asking me for water. And I was like kind of confused, he's like asking for water every couple of minutes. I'm like, man, just give me a second. I'm trying to get this IV started. I'll help you out in a minute. But he just kept asking me for water. And I kept trying to get the IV started, but I wasn't getting any flashback in the needle. So I kept trying, and I just could not get it for the life of me. And I couldn't understand why. And
he wasn't hydrated.
Yeah.
No volume.
No volume. And I didn't realize it at the time. He had all of the classic signs and symptoms of shock, and I didn't recognize that at the time.
What were the physical injuries?
I honestly, I cannot recall off the top of my head.
So it probably wasn't overly traumatic.
The wounds that he sustained,
right?
Whatever he had taken, the wound that he had taken, it was bad enough for him to lose enough blood that he was in shock. But I can't remember the wound or the location of it.
So that might have been internal hemorrhage rather than external.
Might have been. Yeah. And I didn't notice any swelling at the time. I remember trying to get the IV started and not being able to get it. And then eventually finally getting it started. I started a saline bag, or maybe it was lactated ringers at the time. I can't remember. But then he got on the bird and flew off. And I heard that he died en route. And that was always like something that I always kind of like took to heart, that I didn't recognize those signs of shock quickly enough in this situation.
Everybody that's ever been in a trauma scenario in pre-hospital medicine, and I'm sure probably even in the ER setting, has had more. Everyone that's ever been in there has had more than one of those cases, and especially early on in our careers, because we've got all that book training, but guess what? Those books don't mean shit when you're, up to your ass in alligators.
That's true.
I mean, it really doesn't. So, I carry a lot of that stuff around too. But yeah, that's hard. And now that was your first. I think we got way off on the whole question that I asked. Was that your real first encounter?
Yep, those are my first casualties. Was dealing with that mass casualty right off the bat.
Yeah. Where did you end up getting the line started?
I got it in his right AC, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Now, as corpsman, did you ever do any central lines?
No.
Not subclavians.
No, never did any of those. I know that's something that they'll do in the on the rigs sometimes, or in the ER, but that was never something that we got given. We did carry around the IO needles. Those were our methods if we couldn't get a line started on the limbs.
Yeah, but IOs, and that we started using IOs late in my career as a paramedic, but IOs are are much more effective on peds and infants than they are in adults. An IO in an adult is, not the, at least in my time. Now, again, this is something else we were talking about, is how medicine advances through the years. But IOs were not that effective on adults. Is that your same training or understanding or education?
I never had to deploy one, so I'm not sure about the actual effectiveness in person. But that's my training was, if you can't get a line started on the arms and legs because they've been blown all to hell, then your next step is to put in the IO needle. And I'd heard that a lot of the SF medics, if you're cool, you got the scar because they'll do it to each other in training, but we never bothered with it.
Yeah. Okay. That's just fucking stupid, but that's just me. What about EJs? Did you ever start EJs?
No, never did that. We did a couple of crikes and that kind of stuff, but needle decompressions. But I think that was the extent of our abilities at that point. We would get them wrapped up to that degree and then get them on a bird and fly them out as quick as possible.
Yeah. My time as a medic in, BTLS, and I'm assuming that's something that y'all take. It's not BTLS is basic trauma life support. You always, as far as starting an IV, and even fluid replacement has changed since I've been in pre-hospital medicine than what it is now.
Right.
And I know I've heard you talk about that when you were on Coffee with Rich on the American Warrior Society. And if y'all don't know what the American Warrior Society is, you need to go check it out. Just Google American Warrior Society. It's a great thing. And Brian has been on there. That's where I met Brian, was on the shows and being in the chat while you were on with Rich. And I would put a couple of questions in there about stuff, just trying to address, what's new from what's old, because I don't do anything with pre-hospital medicine anymore. So that's kind of why I wanted to have you on here, was to get a good difference of how things change. But I said all that to say that, as I was trained, you always start distal and work your way up. I mean, it's, if you know what that means, it's kind of common sense. If you start something, let me get back on it. If you try to start an IV in the AC, which is the antecubital, it's in the bend of your arm, in the inside of your elbow, that big vein that, that runs right up there. If you blow that vein, you can't start anything distal or further away from the heart than that, because it's just going to leak out the hole you just made. So you would work distally up, and then one vein that you should always have, assuming there's not some type of, maxillofacial trauma, is an EJ, an external jugular. And I've started more than one of those. I didn't know if that was something you guys looked for, or I'm gathering what you're saying is if you couldn't get something distal or, proximal, you stopped at the neck and you would go with an IO. And IO, for people, we're talking terms that people are going, what the hell does this mean? IO means interosseous. It means you take a big ass needle with a big handle on it and you shove it into the bone. Typically for peds, now I don't know what they do for adults, but everything we did, it would be on the inside of the shin, because people don't realize that bones do have a vascular structure. It's not much. And as you get older, that vascular structure is not as proficient as it is when you're a younger child, mainly because as a younger child, when you haven't reached maturity, your bones are still growing and it needs that vascular structure to grow. Once you're grown, you don't have as much vascular structure in there. Is that your understanding as well, Brian?
Yeah, we would put our IO needles directly into the sternum. So
okay.
So it would just kind of like a crunch as it popped in there, and then it would leave this little tail that would come off, and that's what you would hook your port. So you'd hook in your fluids and your and what they've been doing at that time, our blood replacement was lactated ringers or just normal saline. And so
Mhm.
I would set that up and leave that just kind of bolus so that it would be just ready for when they got onto the bird and the flight nurses could take over and start dropping their medication in immediately. So if I had time before the bird came in, I would try to get an IV started. And if we didn't have arms and legs available to start those
Mhm.
IVs on because they were blown up or burned or whatever the case was, then we would go to the IO needles. But the going up to the EJs, those were more out of our scope of practice. They'd never talked about them for us.
Oh wow, I use those a lot in trauma
Mhm.
patients. The biggest problem with doing EJs is figuring out the right tension on the tourniquet.
At first, I was like, tourniquet, eh?
Yeah.
I guess you paramedics do things a little different, huh? Those are for those really combative patients.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, just full disclosure. When you try to start an IV, if anybody doesn't know, they always and I'm sure whenever anybody's went and got blood drawn, they put this large elastic, basically an open-ended rubber band above your arm. They put it tight, and what it does is it restricts the venous blood flow, not the arterial. It's not we call it a tourniquet, but it's not a tourniquet in the literal sense. So what it does is it causes your veins to pool blood below that and expands your veins. And when it makes the veins bigger, so it's easier to start an IV. When you do an EJ, or what's called an external jugular vein, you're starting a needle into that, but you cannot put a tourniquet around somebody's neck. Well, you can, but the law frowns on it. So, but it is typical, and it can be a little bit of a blind stick. I mean, it can be, but normally that blood is pumping to the brain. So even when everything else during a hypovolemic or hemorrhagic shock, other things are shutting down in the extremities, but it's gonna keep the computer alive as long as it can.
Yep.
Yeah. So I was just wondering about that. Shoot, I kind of got off track of where we were going with all this, but how long did you serve over in theater? Did you do how many trips did you make across the pond?
It was just the one. So I was
Okay.
when I was deployed to Afghanistan, and then I came back, and the first thing that I wanted to do was to go back as soon as possible. But I just picked up E5, and there were no more E5 spots. So I was
Really?
pretty upset about that. And they said that they were just starting to do drawdowns at that point. They weren't sending as many people to Afghanistan. So I asked them if to go again, and they said, no, we're going to put you on a boat. And I said, no, thanks. And they said, well, we're going to make you. So then I was able to weasel my way out of that, but I didn't make any friends. So then they sent me over to 11th Marines, and I spent the rest of my time there. And I was pretty disgruntled about it because the only thing that I wanted to do was to get back to combat. It was a weirdly good experience for me, and I really enjoyed my time there. But when I was coming back, no spots. So I figured, well, the SEALs are getting action. I know that. So I'm going to start working my way up, and I'm going to put in a package and go to Buds. And right at about that time, my wife found out she was pregnant, and I'd always told her that I'd get out if we had any kids. So that's what I did. Got out of the military, and
I had a very similar experience. It's when we were coming back. We had a team on our boat. It was 8, and a bunch of us talked them in. They held an indoc for the SEAL teams, and the job that I was doing in the Marine Corps, just a little background. I didn't go in the Marine Corps until I was 25. I had spent 4 years as a law enforcement officer, 4 years on a SWAT team. I was a full-time employed medic for a county service. And we'll get in. I started as an EMT, became an advanced EMT, and this is something I want to get into a little bit later about training. And I continue that even while I was in the Marine Corps. but I did it outside. I worked part-time for Onslow County when I was stationed at Lejeune, and went through paramedic school in Kingston, North Carolina, while I was in the Marine Corps.
That's crazy. Why weren't you a corpsman?
Because I wanted to be a Marine. I was on a. I got put in a job I didn't want to do. Okay, my martial arts instructor that I had, the one I had prior to going to the Marine Corps, who was my team leader on the SWAT team, was a Force Recon Marine. I was a sniper on our SWAT team. I was an entry team. I was a tactical medical officer on our SWAT team. I jumped out of freaking airplanes. I've Australian rappelled off of buildings, done all sorts of CQB. We used to hold a SWAT school every year where we taught other agencies that would pay and come to us, and we would teach them. So I was at the point where, and I had almost gone into the Army when I was like 18, but I had gotten married and had a house. It was like, well, I'm going to go into the Army. So I went down to MEPS, did the whole thing. They want me to swear in. I'm like, no, the recruiter that brought me down here knows. And I was going into an airborne ranger package. And I said, no, I got to sell my house. I can't just frickin' leave. And they were trying to tell me, no, you got to swear in. I'm like, no, I don't. So I didn't. And the recruiter came and said, hey, it's all cool, and I never was able to sell my house. And I was farming at the time. And that's what I ended up getting into EMS and then law enforcement. So I spent my time. And then, like I said, my team leader and my martial arts instructor was a Marine. So it's like, you know what? I've always wanted to serve. That was the whole reason to say that. And when I was on the SWAT team, we pretty much trained the way he trained us, the way, from the military, but also we took a lot of different stuff from GSG9, SAS, a lot of other places for our CQB portion. I mean, we were writing the book at the time. This was the middle 80s that we were doing this. So it's like I had done all this stuff, go to the Marine Corps and like, no, you can't do that. It's like, we don't want you to do that. I'm like, so that was my story. I didn't want to get off on my tangent, but one thing I did want to talk about is the advances in, I guess you could say, rather than split it up between pre-hospital and hospital medicine, but the advances in trauma medicine. The advances in trauma medicine, the biggest advances in trauma medicine always come during war. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most important things that I've noticed, in my time in, is how much of our emergency trauma medicine has come from the places that I've been and seen, and some of the people that I've talked to. And I get the opportunity to talk with some of these special forces dudes who are at the forefront, cutting edge of all emergency trauma medicine. Like, these are the guys that are doing the real work. They've got all these doctors and researchers who are running all these tests and studies. All of that's great and very necessary. But the people that are doing like the cutting edge research are your special forces guys. I got a lot of respect for them. I tend to run into those guys pretty often in my line of work, and they're always down to earth and always extremely good at what they do. Not only are they shooters and fighters and warriors, but they are like apocalypse doctors. They teach these guys how to do everything. At one point I was talking to this special forces medic, and he was telling me that his team has recently discovered that if you give your casualty Versed shortly after the injury that they sustain, it has an amnesic effect. So it wipes out any memory of the injury that caused them to have to go to the hospital. And what they're finding is this dramatically reduces PTSD. So
you want to let people know what Versed is that don't know?
Versed is I believe it's a antipsychotic. I saw them give it to a lot of psych patients when they were in the ER. And I think it can also be used as a pain reliever. But my pharmacology is not that good, so don't quote me on it.
Gotcha.
And so this Versed is given, and they have this amnesic effect so that they don't have PTSD from the incident. So essentially, imagine you're walking along inside of your stack, and then all of a sudden you wake up and you're in the hospital, and you're like, "What happened?"
And you're missing a limb, or you have a TBI or something like that. I mean, that's going to be traumatic enough, but the patient never remembers the incident. Therefore, they can't have the PTSD over that incident, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So they just wake up and they're missing a leg. And that, of course, that's not fun, but at least they don't remember the entire event and everything that happened all the way up to that point. So it dramatically reduces the PTSD effects, which I think is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we get, and that was a special forces medic, Army medic.
Yeah. That's what is that? A 68 whiskey? Somebody will have to say
Army,
about that. I can't
don't
remember.
know.
Yeah, I
I'm
can't
not
remember
sure what they're. I mean, and that depends whether it was, a Ranger or, the
18
Green
Delta.
Berets or Delta. Yeah, Delta. Yeah. So that's pretty awesome. And how did they find that out? Was there some study done, or was it just something anecdotal that came back to them? How did they start using Versed? Did you ever have that discussion?
No, we never wound up getting into how they discovered it. My guess is that they just had some bubba that was like, "Hey, I wonder what this will do,"
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they had a casualty, and they had the option. They gave it to them, and then they discovered that this is what happened after the effect. So that's kind of like what happens. You have just some bubbas who have good medical training, and they have the ability to practice and try new things, and they get to go out to these really bad situations and work on people that are really, really horribly injured, and they get to try things that they think might work, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. I know the Rangers actually have a program called the Rollo program. I can't remember what Rollo stands for off the top of my head, but essentially what they do is that they don't hook up they'll carry whole blood with them into combat. The medics will have coolers on them with whole blood in it, so that if they have any Rangers that sustain casualties, they can hook them up and get them taken care of. But if they run out of that, they have another method called the Rollo program, where they have a what do they call the guys that have the universal blood types. They'll bring him in and pipe a line straight from him into the casualty, and essentially like a walking blood bag. And they'll offload a certain number of units of blood into the casualty, and then send the blood bag back out to combat to go finish fighting.
I didn't realize they were carrying whole blood in there. And let's see, it's been a while since I had A&P. You've got O negative is the universal donor, correct? Anybody can receive O negative.
Yeah, O negative.
And is it AB positive is the universal recipient?
I can't remember that aspect of it, but I do remember the O neg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but whole blood does not last very long. I mean, when you go to your blood bank and you give blood, I forget how many days it is if it's properly stored. Blood doesn't last indefinitely. That's why, the Red Cross does all these blood drives and stuff like that, because you can't just take a pint of blood and that's all they're going to take from you, and put it in a refrigerator and keep it for 6 months and use it on some casualty that comes in. It just doesn't last that long.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't realize that they would carry blood out there like that. So what other? Well, I guess this is the whole thing with talking about how medicine has traumatic medicine, emergency trauma medicine has always gained leaps and stride during combat, because basically it's a trial and error thing. you know, you're doing, and it comes down to like we were talking about the First thing, and even this, I don't think it's so much as some Bubba just said, "Hey, I got some First, let's shoot this guy, see what it does." I think what it is the fact that you've got, very educated pre-hospital medicine people out there, whether they're a corpsman or a medic or a paramedic or, I know the PJs in the Air Force get extensive training in pre-hospital medicine. It's taking those educated people, taking the knowledge, skills, and ability that they have and applying it in new ways in the field that basically nobody's ever thought about before, but some educated individual who's using the greatest weapon he has, which is the 6 inches between his ears, and applying something new because something in the education that he had said, "Hey, this might work."
Yeah.
I remember having, I think it was at Onslow EMS. I was working as a paramedic at Onslow County. I had a guy who was doing construction work, and if you remember, south of Jacksonville was rural. There was, until you got to a hospital, and Onslow County went quite a ways south of Camp Lejeune and Jacksonville proper. We would go to, I believe it was Carteret County. We'd have to go to that hospital, and it was a much smaller hospital. I had a patient that we got called to. He was working in a remote property. I don't know if it was his, but he was doing some kind of construction, reconstruction, something like that. He fell off his ladder. He fell off the ladder and broke his femur because it got hung between the rungs. And of course, it's a little bit of a response time to get there. There's nothing out there. And I don't think I used a hair traction. I hated using a hair traction splint. Those things were cumbersome and painful. Yeah. I think what I now, and here's something you probably aren't even aware of. Do you know what mass pants are?
I think those are the inflatable pants.
Yes. Which came out of Vietnam.
I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah. So mass pants were, I can't even remember what MAST stands for now, but they were an inflatable 3-compartment inflatable suit, one leg, the other leg, and abdominal section. Held together by Velcro, and you pump them up. They were inflatable to put pressure on the extremities, push the blood towards the core. But they were also great for stabilizing fractures. And I had this one patient, like I said, that fell off this ladder, broke his femur. So you put traction on the leg, right? So you get that leg pulled back because a femur fracture is extremely painful. When it fractures, the muscles contract and it's very painful. So no matter what splint you use, you put traction on it to get it straightened back out, which is the only time one of the very few times you ever want to reduce a fracture, right? Got mass pants on him, pumped up that one leg, and I'm like, it popped in my head. Yeah, okay, number one, I'm going to give him morphine. That's pain. He's getting morphine. But number two, I'm like, why can't I give this guy a muscle relaxer? I have Valium. So, I called the freaking doc in ER on the radio and said, "Hey, I want to give this guy Valium." Why? It's a muscle relaxer. His freaking muscles are bounding up. It's like, oh, okay, go ahead. And it worked. I mean, it helped. I don't say it worked. It didn't fix his fracture, but it actually helped. So I think that's the way things, especially, in the field in combat, you're not going to get on the radio. And that's another thing I kind of want to ask you, how things worked when you were in the field. As a paramedic on the streets in the States, I have a medical director. I have all the policies and procedures. We've got all the training that you have to go by ACLS, BTLS, PALS, NOWS, all that kind of stuff. but you can't go outside of anything. If you have an idea, you've got to call that ER doc on duty and say, can I do this? In the field where you were at, medics, corpsmen, I don't care what unit they're with, where's your latitude when you were out there? Where was that latitude that would constitute? Because in the States, working on the streets, you could be charged with malpractice, malfeasance, other things by doing something outside of your scope that you did not get permission from a physician. How did that work with you all in the field?
Same basic kind of concept when it comes to corpsmen, right? Like if you get caught doing something you're not supposed to, then you get hemmed up pretty quick. That's one of the things about being a corpsman is that sometimes you have to ask for, sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission, and a lot of it is, if you're just in a really bad situation and you're like, well, I don't know if this will help, but let's try it. That's kind of where we get a lot of our bleeding control from.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that bleeding control was first discovered when somebody saw his boy bleeding out and was like, oh my God, all of the blood is coming out. I need to stop it from coming out. And he wound up putting
so you stick your hand on it.
You put direct pressure, and now you've saved. And now you're like, wow, that worked really well. Let me try that again and see if it still works. And it does, and so then you start to tell everybody else like, hey, this is what worked for me. It might work for you. When it comes to corpsmen, we pretty often will have a medical officer who oversees us, no matter where we are. Where I was, it was very, very remote, and we didn't have a medical officer. So they flew in a first class petty officer, and he was kind of our acting medical officer for our base. And he had kind of final say. But when you go out with your Marines and get in a firefight and it's just you're not radioing back, asking for permission to do this, that, and the other thing. You have your procedures.
Right.
If this happens, then you have morphine, use this amount of morphine and apply tourniquets. And it's very basic. The stuff that they teach us for combat trauma management is very, very basic. You can teach it in just a couple of days, really. You don't really need a whole lot of information to really make things work. All you have to do is have some good equipment and a basic understanding of how to use it, and you're going to be just fine. And that's pretty much all I did. I just went out there and did my job, and then I went back, and then the first class petty officer would like debrief, like, hey, how can we do things better? What did you do good? What did you do wrong? And that kind of stuff. And we'd talk it out a little bit. And that way we, help you to grow and become a better medic. And I had the opportunity to watch some incredible medics do what they're supposed to do in the middle of combat, and just watching how unflustered they were, being able to go from casualty to casualty and just completely maintain their calm, for their casualties. Mm-hmm. It's important to take care of your casualties physically, but it's also important to take care of your casualties emotionally,
mentally,
mentally. Absolutely. Yeah. You might be the last person that they look at,
Yeah.
And that's
absolutely.
That's a big responsibility for me, and I want to do a good job with that. So those are one of those hard lessons.
And I think that's a big thing for anybody who's in pre-hospital medicine. I remember, learning that as a medic, if you delivered a stillborn, you could baptize the child with sterile water off the, So, all right, let's kind of segue into this. So we've kind of talked about, we know why trauma medicine advances in war. The reason why is because we see so much carnage and trauma that no one should see. No one should have to suffer through. We haven't become civilized enough that we're still not killing people. We're still not killing each other. I think it's a human instinct. I don't think that's ever going to change, but that's a whole different show. But that's how the advances are made, and a lot of times it's made in the ER, or you talked about BAS, and that, which is a battalion aid station, which is basically a field ER. So you as a medic, or anyone as a medic, a corpsman, actually delivers a viable person to that battalion aid station. Now the trauma doctors are taking over. They have a lot more latitude to try different things to save a patient. And they can really come up with a lot of things. It's like, okay, yes, this will save a patient. Let's get that information out to the field and get our pre-hospital, pre-battalion aid station people that information, so they can be doing it out there and have even more viable patients come in to the BAS.
Yep.
Yeah. So you said they tried to put you on a boat after you got back from Afghanistan, and you said no. Wish I could have done that, but I'd have got course-martialed. Anyway, you re-enlisted, right?
Yep.
So you did what, 8 years? You said you went in 2007, got out when?
Yeah, 2013.
2013. So, well, that's
about 7.
Yeah, I was going to say that's 6 years. That's 7 years.
Yeah, just about. I was at the far end. So
what,
yeah.
So when you got back and re-enlisted, what did you do? Because you didn't get to go back to Afghanistan like you wanted.
I came back and I started I was the assistant leading petty officer at the 11th Marines clinic there in Polgus, and so I ran that whole clinic there for the rest.
Where's
of the
that
term.
at for? Where's that at for people?
That's at Camp Pendleton.
Pendleton, yeah, which is California.
Yeah. So I worked there for a little while, and then that's when I decided I wanted to go and see more combat, but then didn't wind up panning out. So my wife got pregnant with our first, and now I got 3 little savages, and I'm with them every day. And it's hard being away from the military. It's the one place that I felt comfortable and like myself. But I can't leave my boys. I'm glad that I got out and I spent some time with them. And the PTSD afterwards was a difficult thing. I struggled with that for quite a few years before I finally got a handle on that and was able to recover. And fortunately, I was able to do that. Now I've got a fantastic family that I'm glad I got out for them, but I still miss it.
Oh yeah. And me, obviously being like 2 or 3 years older than you, it's one of those things that, and it's always been told it is for Marines, because once a Marine, always a Marine. It's one of those things that really is, and I don't mean this derogatory to any other service. I love everyone who ever signed up for any service and has served their country. I have a great amount of respect for them. The fact that if you've served in any branch, we can talk shit between each other and it's all in good fun, But so when I say this, the Marine Corps is something, and you can agree or disagree with me. It's more of a brotherhood than any other service. It really is. And the fact that you served in combat as a Greenside Marine, you will always, always be accepted and called a brother to every Marine that you ever meet.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That is one of the greatest benefits, I think, is to be a doc, to have earned that title and to be respected by my Marines is something I value pretty heavily.
So let's go to your transition. You get out. What do you do when you separate?
So when I separated, they told me this, like somebody said, it's going to be hard. And I said, what do you know about hard? I've been to combat, son. I know hard.
Right.
Like, this is going to be fine. What I wasn't prepared was the loss of my identity. When I got out,
Yeah.
when I was in the military, I was a somebody, I was
Right.
HM2 Doc Mac. I had some
Hmm.
power. I had a good reputation, and I was good at my job and I knew what I was doing. And it was fantastic. I had a great time, but then I got out and now who am I?
Hmm.
I'm not a warrior anymore. I'm not being paid as a warrior. So, that part of my identity is gone and I didn't know who I was or what I wanted to be. And so I just had this crazy crisis I did not expect at all. But it really helped me to kind of think very carefully about who I wanted to be. And then I just started to reassemble an identity that I felt really appeals to me. And I think being a combat medic is one of those things that really speaks to the duality of my personality. I really enjoy fighting. I'm decent at it. I'm well trained, but I also really like taking care of people, especially in the hardest times. And being a combat medic allows me to exercise that duality of my personality, and I really enjoy that. So I got out and kicked around for a little bit, doing different things. I worked for a gun shop at an ammunition factory for a little while, and then I got a job with a veteran service organization helping veterans put in their disability claims. And that was a really good opportunity for me to swap war stories with a lot of veterans. And I
Where
was,
did you where did
right.
you separate out of? Were you at Pendleton?
Yeah, my last command was Pendleton.
Did you stay there when you separated and start your new stuff, or did you immediately relocate?
I immediately relocated back to Colorado. This is where all my family is, my wife's
Okay.
family. So we immediately just came back to Denver because we got all our people here, and I
Gotcha.
love it here. It's amazing.
Okay. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but go ahead and continue. You were doing helping veterans do
Yep.
claims.
And that helped me to kind of get a grasp on my PTSD because I was able to swap a lot of war stories. And I learned a lot from these guys that, we all have different things that cause us this trauma, this PTSD. We all have a different reason for it, but the symptoms were the same. This one
Right.
guy could have gone through a whole wide variety of things that I never went through, but he's still struggling with it in the same way. And I like to view the PTSD as very similar to, mental wounds are very similar to physical wounds. If you
Hmm.
don't treat that physical wound, what happens? It's going to get infected.
Infected.
It's going to get toxic. It's going to destroy
Septic.
you. It's going to get septic. It's going to be toxic. It's going to be toxic to your other relationships. And how do we treat it? We expose it to the sun. We scrub it out. We have to disinfect it. And I've disinfected a lot of wounds. I've had grown Marines crying on my gurney because I've had to scrub out, these nasty, horrible wounds. And they ask me, Doc, do we have to do that? And I tell them, yeah, man, we got to do it because if we don't, you're going to die. And,
Yeah.
these mental
From
wounds are
sepsis.
from sepsis, from toxicity, right? And
Hmm.
mental wounds are that same way. We decide, what, I don't want to look at this thing. It hurts too much. I don't want to think about it. And so you avoid it, and you avoid it with drugs and alcohol and whatever it is that's your thing, just to avoid thinking about it. But really, what you need to do is confront it. And the more we confront it, the more we take care of it, the more we talk about it, the more we realize that we aren't alone and that we're not some sort of a freak. Everybody, every Marine, every warrior that I've run into who struggles with PTSD thinks that there's some sort of special freak, that nobody really understands what they've gone through personally. And maybe not the exact situation, but we've all gone through something very similar and we can identify with it. And so understanding that we're not alone in our struggles, I think, is one of the key aspects of growth that's really helped me to change my PTSD outlook.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's awesome to hear. And that is a great analogy and description of things. And none of that stuff was, well. First of all, PTSD. I don't even know when they came up with that terminology, because a lot of this happens right here with our first responders in the States.
Yeah.
Our firefighters, our police officers, and people don't understand. Paramedics go through it. Everybody talks about, I was in law enforcement and I had to see all these things, and firefighters say, yeah, I saw this. Well, guess what? The paramedic was the guy in charge of saving that life. The paramedic is the one that gets more. Just because you see it, you didn't have to treat it. The paramedic was the one trying to treat it and save this guy's life, or this person, or this child. They were the ones that had to, and then they couldn't. And paramedics are trained to save lives. They're not trained to lose lives. And in my time, it was called burnout. Let's think about our Vietnam veterans who came back. Number one, they didn't come back as heroes like the first Gulf War that I was a part of, and then the 20-year war that you were a part of, Operation Iraqi Freedom and GWAT, and I don't know how many acronyms they have for it now. They were treated with respect when they came back for the vast majority. There were people at airports welcoming them back. Vietnam veterans never got that. They got spit on if they came home in a uniform. There was no readjustment for them. What about our Korean War vets? What about, I don't know about what your age is. My grandfather was World War II vet.
Mine too.
There was no, okay, they had no readjustment programs. No. Now, one thing they did have is that in World War II is there was a really good factory manufacturing skilled trades industry for those people to come back to. And a lot of them did. And they had very successful lives, monetarily, economically. They led very good middle-class lives. But that had nothing to do to address the things that they saw in war. So I'm glad we've gotten to that point. And I'm glad that there are more and more programs out there to help folks that come back from combat to address those. I don't know if it's the right phrase to say, but the mental injuries that you come back with, Yeah. You may come back from combat without a scratch physically, but you're going to have a whole lot of tears in the mental side of it.
Yeah, it eats a lot of people up. I know
it does.
My dad was in during Vietnam, but he didn't get sent to Vietnam, so he never saw combat. But my grandpa was a heavy combat troop from World War II. And when he came back, he was very standoffish with my dad. He never, he was very distant and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until I had gone to combat and then had my own son that I was able to really understand the way my grandfather was with my dad. My dad would tell me, pretty often, that my grandpa never wanted to hug him, never wanted to really touch him, didn't really want to have anything to do with him, and didn't really ever pay any attention to him. And it wasn't until I had my own son and I was dealing with my own PTSD that, I was dealing with it very similar to the way my grandfather had. And if my dad hadn't told me that story, I would never have made the connection between the two, that's how I was going to be. Can you change?
Can you unpack that a little bit more? Why do you think that was? Why do you think that maybe kind of during those generations that there wasn't that kind of thing? Didn't want to, you said your grandfather didn't want to hug his son, which is your dad. Why do you think that might have been? Do you have any opinion on it? Could it have been something on, and this is my own opinion, and so I'll ask if you agree, disagree. I think that generation didn't want to because they were scared of getting close to somebody that they were going to lose because they had already experienced that.
And that was a big feeling for me. My whole feeling was these attachment issues. It was me thinking about, I don't know if I'm going to be around here that long.
Mhm.
Like I live a hard life, and I'm not making good decisions. My brain was so messed up that I might not be around very long, and this kid might not be around here for very long.
Yeah,
And
exactly. So you're gonna experience another loss.
yeah,
Not that you're gonna be around, but okay, my kid, something's gonna happen to my kid or whatever, and I'm gonna experience, and I'll still be here, but I'm going to experience another loss.
right. And you try to protect yourself, right? You try to,
Right.
you're
Mentally.
standoffish. You're mentally trying to hold yourself back a little bit and not experience that love, because if you don't love that person, then you can't miss them when they're gone, you know?
Right.
And it wasn't until I went through that with my own son. I remember holding my son for the first time, and it could have been anybody's kid, and I felt
Mhm.
horrible. I felt like a terrible father. I felt like somebody who, that like, how could you not love your own kid? But I would just hold him and I'd be like, I mean, he could be anybody's kid. It doesn't really, I don't feel anything, and that really worried me for a while. It worried my wife too, of course, like every wife wants their husband to, love their kid, and I just didn't feel anything. And it wasn't until she sent me an article about a guy who is talking about something very similar. And I realized that I'm not a horrible person. I'm just a person,
Right.
and I have these horrible thoughts. I understand those types of dads who run away. I'm lucky that I didn't, but I know that I wanted to, because it just was too hard for me to face. I just didn't want to face it. But once I forced myself to face it and confront it, that's when things started to change. And it was gradual, but eventually I kind of came around, and now I adore my boys, and I'm glad that I put in that effort. But I can understand those dads who run away, if they're not strong enough, or, they don't have the mental capacity to engage in it, they're just going to run away. And that's what I would have done. And it was a good benefit for me to see that, how much it hurt my dad. My grandfather was a combat veteran, and he was distant from my father, and that hurt my father a lot. And I don't want
Mhm.
to hurt my son, but I've got this close example, all these stories that my dad has told me. Now I can kind of understand. I can empathize with what I would have done to my own kid. And it helped me to kind of see things in a better perspective, and to put in that extra effort to come back around, and to make it work for him.
Yeah, I completely understand. And let me ask you, you said you had that feeling the first time that you held your son, but I'm inclined to think that the first time you saw your son, you very much loved your son. You were just scared of your feelings. It wasn't that you didn't love your son. Am I incorrect?
No, I think you're spot on there.
Yeah. It's something that scared you. It's like, I'm not going to be able to, to be what you're supposed to be, I guess.
Yeah.
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 All right. Let's segue into something different. Let's talk about okay, well, no, to continue on that. So you went to the let's get that plug back in there. Can you hear
Yeah.
me?
Yep. I got
Okay.
you.
All right, so you went from helping the veterans. You're now a certified paramedic, am I correct?
No, I only
No.
ever attained the level of EMT, and that was only because I was working in the ER. You never have to have any kind
Okay.
of certs as a corpsman. As long as you go to the schools and that kind of stuff, you don't have to be an EMT or a paramedic, which sucks, because when I got out of the military, I was like, man, I got all these medical skills. Let me go do something with it. Turns out you can't do anything with it, because you don't really have any credentials that the civilian world will recognize.
And that is sad. And I wish I would have known this many years ago, because I would have been an advocate of some way to advocate a some type of a transition program for combat medics, whether you're well, actually PJs, if you know I'm talking about PJs with the Air Force, they
Right.
actually go through paramedics. Excuse me, they go through paramedic school while they're in the Air Force in their training.
Hmm.
And I believe they do that in Dallas, and actually do their internships with whatever Dallas EMS services are and stuff like that. But they're the only ones that I know actually go through and become nationally registered paramedics. Army medics and Navy corpsmen don't. However, they do have them, because I do have a story, because I got reciprocity when I was at Camp Lejeune as a North Carolina intermediate EMT, because I was I started out in Indiana. That's where I'm originally from. That's where I first started. I went through EMT school. Then they created a new program, which was an advanced EMT. So we had advanced airway, we had EKG, and we could start IVs. Now, I could start a line of D5W, but I couldn't push D50. You know how you get away with that?
How?
You start a line of D5W and you squeeze that bag as hard as you can and get all the sugar into a person in hypoglycemic shock. I never pushed to amp a D50, but D5W is sugar. Bring somebody at it, and then give them a glass of orange juice with a tablespoon of sugar and have their wife make a meal for them. And, but anyway, I got to, anyway, I'm not going to go into that, but I really wish there would have been a program to where corpsmen coming back who have had extensive training, which is really not outside the base of a paramedic, depending on what region of the country you live in, as a corpsman, an Army medic. And again, I don't care what unit you worked with, the training is pretty much the same. So I'm sure, I guarantee you as a corpsman, you went through ACLS, right? Advanced Cardiac Life Support. You went through BTLS, Basic Trauma Life Support. Did you ever go through PALS or NOWS? Pediatric?
Yeah, we did PALS.
Okay. Yeah. So there's no reason there should not be a transition program to go from a Navy corpsman that has gone through and passed all the training, or an Army medic. I don't even, what do they call those? 11 Bravo was their infantry.
18 Deltas.
Is that what it is? 18 Delta?
68 Whiskeys, I think, are the medics, and then the 18 Deltas are the Special Forces medics.
Okay. I don't know what their training difference would be. But now, a lot of times with the Special Forces stuff, they will teach more surgical type stuff. They'll teach stuff like, suturing or different stuff like that you can't do in the street as a paramedic.
Yeah, I did a lot of minor surgeries and suturing. That suturing is one of my favorite things to do when I was in the ER. I loved it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there should be a transition program. They have these programs now, what is it? Veteran to something,
I had heard at one point that the physician assistant to be a PA, that was originally developed to put to work all of the medics coming out of the military. But I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, I had actually, when I was still a paramedic, I had looked at becoming a PA, going to PA school.
Yeah.
My understanding back then was PA school was basically the first and the third year of medical school. But in order to even qualify for that, you had to have a bachelor's degree. And of course, you don't have to have a bachelor's degree to become a paramedic or an EMT or anything like that. So did you have to go through an EMT school?
Yeah. When I got to the ER, I did, but not to be a corpsman. To be at
I meant when after you separated.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I went through it again. I went through EMT school again because none of the certs transferred across, so I had to go all the way back through the entire course. And so I went through it a second time after I gotten out of the military, and since then, everything has lapsed. So I've actually been thinking about heading to paramedic school myself, just for the heck of it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I had thought from the time that you spent on with Coffee with Rich, talking to Rich Brown with the American Warrior Society. If you don't know who those are, check them out. I thought you were a certified paramedic.
no,
And
no.
that was one of the things I was going to ask you, because I know it has changed so much. At least, see, in my day, you couldn't say, shit, I'm tired of working at McDonald's, I'm going to go to paramedic school. No, you can't. In my day, you had to go to EMT school. You become an EMT, and you have to work for at least 1 year in what we used to call a 9/11 program, or and 9/11 was in its infancies when I was doing this. Not every place had 911. You couldn't. In the county I worked in, if you were in the county, you had a 7-digit number you had to call to get an ambulance. If you worked in the city, you could call 911. 911 didn't mean anything in the county. Got you nothing. So you had to go to EMT school. You had to get hired and work for a full-time 9/11 service, EMS service, before you could even apply to paramedic school. And then they came out with, and they were only offered at certain major hospitals, and the hospitals taught those programs.
Mm-hmm.
Then they came out, at least in Indiana where I grew up, they came out with a brand new program called Advanced EMT. And I was in the first Advanced EMT program offered, and graduated top of the class, And that allowed you more privileges to work on a patient, because the way most systems were set up is, you still had and still have in the Midwest a lot of volunteer services that they are the first ones to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And so paramedics, the highest level of certification for pre-hospital medicine in the United States is a paramedic. They didn't go out on every call, not every boo-boo that happened or anything like that. Paramedics stayed ready for trauma or cardiac or stroke or those type of related injuries or medical emergencies. You didn't want to have a paramedic tied up on one side of the county working on a scratch from a barbed wire fence when a traumatic car crash comes in 20 minutes away.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to go through these steps before you could ever even go through paramedic school. And now you don't have to do any of that. Now paramedic schools are being taught in community colleges and stuff like that. You don't even know how to put a Band-Aid on and go to paramedic school. And you will graduate as a paramedic. And the whole reason is that before you went to paramedic school, you needed to know how to treat a patient. You needed to know how to treat a scene, scene safety and all of the basic things that you needed to know before you ever became that person in charge, because EMTs weren't in charge,
Yeah. I think a lot of that kind of stuff has changed. The reason why they came out with EMTs in the first place and then eventually went to paramedics was because they had all of these medics getting out of the military with all of these skills and nowhere to put them. So they're like, why don't we go ahead and just put them on over here? They've got all these skills for stopping bleeding. Why don't we get them stopping that bleeding? But it's coming up on my dinner time here, and so hopefully we can get this wrapped up for a second, and I
Okay.
can get some chow. I'm hungry.
Yeah, I did not know if you had a hard stop. So can we talk? Can we have a couple of minutes?
Yep.
Tell me about Stop the Bleed and what you think about that.
Stop the Bleed is a great program. I think it's a little bit it's a little bit light. I would like primarily it's teaching tourniquets, and now they're teaching wound packing, which I think is fantastic. And I think that's a great program to be getting people aware of what they need to do in order to keep somebody alive. You know, if you've got your most preventable death is hemorrhagic shock, teaching somebody how to control bleeding with direct pressure, I think is fantastic. I think we should be teaching this stuff in school. You know, we have home ec class,
Kind of like gun safety.
Absolutely. I mean, these are all things that we need to know every day, and kids can help each other out. I mean, my boys know how to apply tourniquets and put on direct pressure because, you know, little boys get into some shenanigans all the time. I want them to be able to take care of their brother until I can get there, you know, that kind of thing. And I think we should be teaching it everywhere.
Awesome. That was another thing about tourniquets that we didn't get into, but you know, tourniquets were one of those things when I was a paramedic, you never touched a tourniquet other than start an IV. Tourniquet was life or limb. That's what I kind of wanted to go into when we were talking about the advances of medicine during war is during the whole Afghan-Iraq war is the things that were learned in the field with the military is that it used to be if you put a tourniquet on, you lost a limb. If it was on more than 15 minutes, you lost a limb. Now they figured out that, okay, tourniquets work. I do think that tourniquets are over-applied in the street, but that's whole nother situation. Real quick, DIY IFAC. If you've got somebody that's like, man, I just can't go buy something off the internet. What can I take from my medicine cabinet and make a DIY IFAC that, okay, we put it together, we put it in a gallon Ziploc bag so we take it with us on, you know, whenever we go on a trip. What are your thoughts on that real quick?
If it's a DIY, like you don't want to buy anything, some of the items around your house that you might be able to use, I would say an exercise band. If you can use that, that would be a good tourniquet. There's a tourniquet out there called the SWAT T that is essentially the same thing. So if you happen to have some of those exercise bands, those rubber exercise bands, that could be a good tourniquet if you've got nothing else. I'm always preaching direct pressure. A lot of people think I don't have a tourniquet. I don't have any medical supplies. I can't do anything. No, you can hop on that casualty, direct pressure over top of the wound. You can save somebody's life that way easily. So
pressure points.
Pressure points. Yep, that's a great one. Learning a little bit of wound packing. If you've got a lot of gauze, a lot of times I'll tell somebody, you know, you can cut up a T-shirt. That works just as well as getting normal gauze out of your emergency kit. Now, it's not going to work as good as like your Quick Clot or your Kaido gauze, which has a hemostatic agent in it, right? The hemostatic makes the blood clot more quickly. And I think that that's a great method for controlling bleeding in pretty much any part of your body. If you need to control bleeding, wound pack it if at all possible, and direct pressure, it'll do a lot of good for somebody.
Okay, perfect. Let's talk about Mountain Man Medical Training real quick. And I'm going to bring up your website, so I won't be able to see you, but well, I can during there. But this is Mountain Man Medical, which Brian is a part of. On this website, they have a free training site that anyone can go to, download it, and take the training. And I've done it. I did it a couple of years ago because it was a couple of years ago I saw you on American Warrior Society with Rich. And I'm like, you know, whenever you're a person that has experience in something, anytime you see somebody else is talking about something that you know about, you're always a little bit skeptical until you find out what their knowledge is and knowledge, skills, and abilities. So I went to Mountain Medical about 2 years ago, and I went through your March training that is free. And this is not a 15-minute deal, you guys. I'm going to let you explain it. I went through it. I gave a review on it that I felt that in my limited experience of online training and stuff like this, I've never seen anything as comprehensive as what is on that website. You want to go with that?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. I put a lot of work and effort into it. It was my first time on camera, so it's a little clunky. I've actually been thinking about redoing a new one here recently. But essentially, we have the emergency trauma response course, and it's totally free. It only takes about an hour and 20 minutes, and it'll teach you how to use all of the items in your trauma kit, just the very basics of everything that you need to take care of somebody. So it's free, it's quick, and it'll teach you everything, or it won't teach you everything you need to do. It'll give you the basics so that you can expound on it. Now, normally what I'll tell people is like, hey, this is not a great substitute for in-person training. You should go and get a class, do this stuff in person, so you've got an expert there that can check and you can ask questions. But if you don't have the time, you don't have the money for it, this is a free and easy way to kind of learn some of the basics.
But that online training to me is better than a stop the bleed course. It's much more comprehensive. And you say it's quick. Well, in today's world, it's not quick. It takes an hour and a half, 2 hours to go through this. But you go through it in segments that you get comprehensive online training that teaches you how to do this, shows you the things, and you can put those things into practice. I don't think I've ever seen a better online first aid, if that's what you want to call it, course ever anywhere.
Man, I really appreciate that.
And I think this needs to get, and I'm going to do my best to try to promote that more and more, because you've got these people out there. Oh yeah, I'm going to buy a trauma kit. I'm going to buy it from Mountain Man Medical or the ABC Medical, or because there's a lot of places out there selling trauma kits. I wanted to get more into your products. I didn't realize you had a hard time out, and I apologize for that. But they have great products. But this training is great. Do it. I'm going to let you talk about your products, what you want to take this show out with. Talk about your products. And
all right. Well, I would say that our top leading trauma kit so far, our most popular one is going to be our Yellowstone. And the Yellowstone has all of the basics in it you need to take care of massive bleeding. And it's designed as kind of an IFAC, an individual first aid kit, so that it takes care of one person in particular. And so it's not really dedicated to like minor bumps and scrapes and abrasions, but like heavy traumatic bleeding. Like someone is bleeding to death and you need to stop it. This will have all of the items in it that you need to take care of that. So that's going to be our Yellowstone. And then the next one up, the next size up, our next most popular one is going to be our Wind River, which is essentially the Yellowstone on steroids. It's got double everything plus a lot of extra stuff that'll help you out, like Band-Aids and Motrin, Tylenol, that kind of thing. So those are our biggest sellers, and we're doing pretty good so far.
That's awesome. And again, guys, you can't just go to Mountain Man Medical and buy that kit the Yellowstone or the other one that he mentioned. You can't just go there and buy that kit, throw it in your car, and think you know what the hell you're doing. No, at the very least, before you buy anything, go take their free training course. It will teach you more than any other thing that's free and online that you can get. And after you take that, look into something local where you can find a Stop the Bleed or something to do some more in-depth training, face to face. But take their online training course. Then figure out what you need to put together of what your skill is, because you can buy 20 tourniquets and carry them in your boot and your pocket and your car and everywhere else. You ever unwrapped it and know how to use it? Yeah,
the first time that you're playing with it is not when someone's bleeding out. That's not what you want.
No, you don't want to be trying to learn how to use this tourniquet when somebody's lost an arm in an auger at a farming accident. You need to get the training. Training is more than equipment. training means more than equipment. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Skills are perishable. They're like knives. You got to resharpen them every so often or you're going to lose them. So,
Absolutely.
that's kind of the benefit of having like this online training. You can go back and watch it, every couple of months. We've got police departments that are watching it together. We've got the Boy Scouts. There's a Boy Scout master that came up and said that he's making all of his scouts watch it all. We've got church security teams that are sit down and they'll all watch it together and practice on each other and that kind of stuff because it's free. And you got all the knowledge there at your fingertips.
Yeah, that is awesome. All right, man. I have loved this. I would love to have you back on and talk about more stuff. I mean,
I'd totally be back on. I'd love it.
All right. I don't know how busy your schedule is, but I'm sure it's pretty busy. But we'll get back in touch and help. Maybe if you're up to it, maybe we could do a continuous thing. Maybe every month, every 2 months, something like that. Come back on. Do some things, see what's new.
You're I love it.
For that, man.
Absolutely. Let's talk it out.
All right. I appreciate it. Any last words?
Oh, I think be safe and careful out there. And I love you all.
One thing I would say is it's something I came up with because a lot of people that kind of watch my stuff is kind of prepping, and of course my background is shooting. If you know how to make holes, know how to plug holes.
Be ready for whatever the mountain throws at you.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you for being on. Thank everybody that's going to watch this when it's up on YouTube. And please subscribe, get notifications, do all that stuff. We appreciate everything here tonight. So y'all take care.